All right, so the next aspect of this is to take what we learned about digestion with the pig as the model in the first few digestion videos, and now talk about how that's different with the ruminants. And yes, you're probably going to have a bunch of faculty that have now discovered the virtual backgrounds in Zoom. And yes, I have my stampeding sheep from Australia. That felt that was somewhat appropriate, so I may mix it up a little bit with those just for some fun. All right, let's talk ruminant digestion of protein. Now, for me, this is the coolest part because this is where I spend a lot of my time on my master's and PhD work is in protein digestion in ruminants. And one of the coolest things about the microbes that are in that rumen is not only do they utilize stuff that we can't use, but the animal can. The animal actually doesn't use it, the microbes do, but the animal benefits is it's able to utilize that plant animal protein or MPN to incorporate into their own growth. So it's what we call microbial cell protein. And that is actually literally the dead bodies of the poor little microbes that live out their life cycle in the rumen. Where do they go when they die? And so if we want to talk about upcycling and utilizing every little scrap of whatever and being very efficient, the ruminant animals, because that fermentation and those microbes are happening in the rumen, it's before the primary site of digestion in the small intestine. Remember we talked about pre-gastric fermentation? So what's going to happen is basically these little microbial cells become a secondary feed source. So it's like you're not just what you feed the animal, but the bugs themselves become a feed source. And so when an animal consumes protein, the bugs in the rumen are going to do their thing and utilize all of the feed nutrients to create what we've talked about, VFAs and all those other things. But there is going to be some protein that the bugs do not touch. That's what we call bypass, or I prefer the term escape protein. It doesn't bypass the rumen, it just escapes the microbes. And then we're also going to have what we call the microbial protein. And in this process, ammonia is produced, and excess levels of that can go to urea. And we're going to break down a little bit about how all these systems work. So bear with me. You're going to take that image of a cow and pretend that you're picturing now Celina, the rumen that Celina's drawn, as well as the small intestine. So if we take that feed protein that we're starting with, and that animal's going to consume it, there's two fates that a feed protein can go through. The first is it can be unfermented, meaning it is going to escape or bypass the microbes in the rumen. That is going to go straight to the small intestine to contribute directly to the intestinal digestion. So it's going to go through just like what we talked about with what happens in the pig GI tract. When it gets to the abomasum, it's going to have HCl and pepsinogen and all of that stuff, and then the rest of the enzymes in the small intestine. And that's going to be what we call feed protein that's getting to the small intestine. The second fate, if it's not unfermented, then it's going to be fermented by the microbes. And so that is what we call microbial cell protein. Means the bugs are going to break it down and use it for their own growth and development. One byproduct of that is ammonia, and that can be recycled. So in times when protein's limiting, the animals, ruminants have that ability to spare certain nutrients. We talked about how they can spare glucose. They can also spare nitrogen a little bit by recycling it. And if there's excess, sometimes the bugs may need that ammonia to go back into their system. So it's multi-purpose, and it just allows maximum flexibility of how to use that nitrogen source. The other way is that they use the nitrogen, the amino group off those amino acids, and produce that carbon skeleton, and that can be led to volatile fatty acid synthesis, which we know the animals can use for energy. So what's going to happen is those microbial cells are going to die and pass into that small intestine. So the small intestine actually has two sources of protein that comes in. That's coming directly from the feed, and that which is coming from the cells of the microbes themselves. Together, those make up what we call the potentially metabolized protein. If you hear the term metabolizable protein in ruminant nutrition, that's what it's referring to, is both the feed protein and the microbial protein making it to the small intestine. This is actually how a lot of dairy rations are starting to be balanced, is on this metabolizable protein, predicting what's coming from the feed and what's coming from the microbes to get the most accurate prediction of how much protein is truly getting that small intestine that's going to be utilized by that cow. That's it for the ruminant. Short, sweet, and to the point, but so much going on in there. And we'll kind of hit metabolism next. That'll be a little bit longer video, but that'll be our last video of the series.